Delighted to see everybody here for our first official discussion hour for our Crisis and Safety Certificate course. Again, I think I said this, it seems like we're hearing from folks in the chat about where they're coming in from. It seems like we have folks from coming in across the state. And we're really excited to see all of you here today. So I wanted to just get started. We only have an hour together, so I'm really going to just dive right in. Most of what we're going to be doing today is we're going to be going through applying some of what we learned in the webinars that you watched for today's discussion hour to some case studies. So I wanted to go through some of the themes that you all put in your journal entries. We asked each of you to do a journal entry for each of the offerings that you watched. And so I went through them. I will say I went through these on, what's today, Thursday? I went through these on Tuesday. So if you've done it since Tuesday, I did not pull from your journal entries. But I pulled out some themes that I saw popping out from folks' journal entries. So it seems like things that stood out to folks were things around the function of non-suicidal self-injury. So the facts that folks use it for coping or distress relief. People commented on the relationship between NSI and suicidal ideation and behavior. We had a lot of folks commenting on the use of the SOAR assessment model. A lot of folks also on the neurobiology of NSSI. This was something that really stuck out to me a lot. There was that one fact about the sort of pain pathways in the brain that I think for me really has stuck with me. And it seems like that was true for some other folks in their journal entries. We had one or two folks to talk about harm reduction approaches, which I thought was a really fantastic point to bring in. And then we also had a couple of folks talk about, when we talk about challenges, using some of these techniques with clients who may not necessarily be ready to engage in change around this behavior. I said, I was using a little bit of like stages of change language when I was summarizing and saying, there's a lot of young people that don't want to cease this behavior. And so using some of these techniques with folks who are maybe a little less engaged or ready might be really challenging. And I think that this is something I'm hoping will come out in the breakout rooms that we're going to be going into today. So if that was something that came up for you, I really encourage you to bring that up with the folks in your group today to see sort of what their thoughts are on it. I wanted to see from other folks, and please feel free to unmute or chat in. Are there things I missed? So again, this was not a very scientific method of pulling out themes. This was me and my eyes. And again, it's also been 2 days since then. So I'd love to hear from anybody, any things that popped out at you that are not reflected here on this list. From the folks whose faces I see, it seems like people are seeing that that's pretty comprehensive. But if things pop out at you all throughout, please feel free to put it in the chat, things that sort of come to you. We'd love to hear from you. So as I said before, we're going to be jumping in with a case study today. That's sort of, one thing this is our second time doing this course. And one thing that came out to folks from the comments last time is that people really wanted to apply this stuff, right? They wanted to really see what it looks like in action. And so one way we've decided to sort of structure things this time is around case studies and to sort of practice applying things. Now we know that folks come from a variety of different types of programs, but we tried to come up with one where, this client might not look like all the clients that you all are working with, but we're hoping that some of the lessons are generalizable or transferable to the settings that you are working in. So our client for today is Amanda. So sorry. Amanda is a 13-year-old Caucasian female. She's in 8th grade. Her grades are pretty average at school. She's not necessarily popular, but she has a few close friends. About 6 weeks ago, Amanda's gym teacher noticed some open cuts as well as older scars on Amanda's leg in the locker room after gym class. The teacher reported her observations to the school counselor. In a one-on-one meeting with Amanda, the counselor tells Amanda that it's been brought to her attention that Amanda might be injuring herself. Amanda initially is very hesitant to talk about this. The counselor assures Amanda that she is not in trouble and only concerned with supporting her. Amanda still seems hesitant to discuss the topic, but agrees to answer some of the counselor's questions. So that's our scenario for today that we're going to be dealing with. So right now we're also going to put into the chat a copy of Amanda's completed SOAR assessment that she has done with the counselor. So you'll see, just a reminder, this is sort of what the SOAR assessment looks like. These are some of the questions, so SOARs, sorry, not SOAR, SOARs. So S for suicidal ideation, O for onset frequency and methods, A for aftercare, R for reasons, and S from stages of change. And these are some of the sort of sample questions that would reflect that. So you can see in the chat a copy of the document, as well as if you can't download the document, there's also a link there that will take you to the website and there will be a copy there. So you're going to want to have this because you're going to be discussing these results in your breakout room. Is anyone having any difficulty accessing the assessment? I see some folks shaking their head, and I'm hoping that means no, I'm not having any difficulty, as opposed to no, I can't access it. Great. Okay. If you are having issues, please feel free to chat in and we can help you with accessing it. We're also we're going to send you out into breakout rooms of about 4 to 5 people. So hopefully if you can't access it, someone in your breakout room can and can share their screen. And in your breakout room, and we'll put these questions in the chat if that's possible, Leslie. I also realized I was raring to get started, so I did not introduce my colleague, Leslie Giglio. She has been sending you many emails. I'm sure you're always so excited to see her name in your inbox because I'm always so excited for it. Leslie, if you want to take a chance to just introduce yourself really quick.
Hey everyone. Sorry, I'm under the CTAC admin logo. But again, my name is Leslie. I'm one of the senior coordinators with CTAC. And again, if you have any just tech questions throughout the webinar or just generally throughout the certificate course, feel free to message me or send me an email. But great to meet everyone.
Thanks, Leslie. Sorry about that. So Leslie's going to send you all into breakout rooms, and you are going to be discussing the following questions. So the first question is, based on the exam, so you'll read through the SOAR assessments together and think, how would you proceed based on Amanda's answers to the SOARs assessment? And then also maybe even think about how would you respond to each of her responses? What would you say to support her? And then after you do that, I'd love to also hear from people when we get back about how you would maybe then proceed to reaching out to Amanda's parents or in this case, it's parents, but sometimes it's caregivers, to bring them into the conversation. So those are our discussion questions. What questions do folks have before we send you out? I know that we sort of jumped into this really quickly. We only have an hour, so I'm trying to sort of make use of time. But are there questions before we proceed? Okay. I usually take silences as being an indicator that people are rearing to go. So I will, Leslie, whenever you're ready, you can send people out. Oh, and I will probably be jumping in. Don't mind me, but I'm going to be jumping around just to make sure that folks are doing okay into your rooms. So if I come in, please ignore me. Welcome back, everyone. I know that went by very quickly. So we'll give folks a chance to come back in. And then I would love to hear a bit of a share out from Any groups that would like to sort of share any sort of gems or nuggets of wisdom or interesting points that came out of their conversations? So we'll just, seems like folks are still rejoining us. Okay. So welcome back, everyone. I was just saying to folks who had come back a little early that I know that that went by very quickly, and I hope that you had chance to discuss and it didn't feel too rushed. And I'd love to hear from a couple of folks, just what came up for them in their groups, whether there were sort of anything that came up that maybe you hadn't thought of, outstanding questions, sort of nuggets of wisdom. Would love to hear folks share. Yeah, Sarah.
I was curious and I brought the question to my group and kind of got a similar answer regarding the SOARS assessment. I thought it was a great tool. I haven't seen it yet. And I shared about how our agency regularly does the Columbia suicide screening and how there's really not necessarily an explicit question about self-harming unrelated to suicidality in that. And while we may, as clinicians, kind of add that in when we're asking, I thought about that missing and how then we're not necessarily explicitly on paper screening for NSSIB.
Yeah, that's a great point. I'm wondering if other folks have thoughts on that in terms of their own practice. Oh, yep. Matthew, feel free to.
I will say for my agency as well, we have the CSSRS, and there's a NICE. I'm trying to remember what it stands for, New York State something assessment, but it's an adult version, adult assessment. And there's just like a question of, is there self-harm otherwise? But there's not, there's not a separate assessment that we can go to for that.
The NISCRI, which the outpatient clinics use. Yeah, I was just going to share like something that I've talked about with some colleagues is having the standardized tools are great, but also knowing how to do an assessment without them is really important, right? Because you're not going to have everything on a piece of paper, right? So you just have to know to be curious and, make sure that you are able, when you're doing your risk assessment, be able to ask about self-harm, what happens when people tick you off, right? There's lots of stuff. Like I said, the scales are great, but we didn't have the Columbia when I was learning how to do assessments. So it's like also that curiosity and asking those questions help.
I think that's such a great point. And also, sometimes things will come up that clue that sort of clinical instinct for you. Like, I need to ask more questions about this. And sometimes you'll have that assessment handy and sometimes you won't. And so being able to sort of integrate it in to that clinical practice, it's one of those big challenges of clinical work. It's about keeping all of those things in mind at once. We're all sort of juggling constantly all of those different things. And that's, it's one of many things that makes this work challenging. But I think it's a great point, Deirdre. Thank you for sharing that. Carmen, love to hear from you.
Hi guys, good morning or good afternoon. I was in room 2 and I'm actually excited to be in this group because there's different people with different roles that do things a little bit differently. And it's great because it's like, okay, I'm here, you're here, you're here, you're here, you're here. We get to see the whole picture from beginning to end. But for the assessment for me, being a multiple crisis, I don't follow the direct assessment with the tools and stuff like that. I like to go in, just as a regular person trying to build that rapport and try to pull the information out using storytelling. You'll be able to get your answers to all those questions just by that simple storytelling. And it's not going to look like, okay, yeah, sure. It's more personal, and she's going to be able, or the client will be able to open up more and provide more information that's going to be able to answer all the questions in the assessment.
Yep. Yeah. I think, one thing I think is nice about the SOAR assessment is that it does sort of when you look at those sort of sample questions, it's sort of implicit there that you're doing this as part of a conversation. This is not necessarily like it's not like a sheet. There isn't, a quiz sort of scoring mechanism. And, scored assessments also have their place. And also, it's sort of meant to be a conversation. I think it's a great point. Thanks, Carmen. We're going to hear from one more person. I know that we only have an hour for these, and I feel like we want to make them come in. So I want to hear from Sarah Beth, and then we're going to send you back out because we have another little portion of this scenario that we want to let you all dig into.
Yeah, great. So something I brought up in my group and everybody gave great feedback and agreed with was really how powerful psychoeducation can be with this. We talked about how the at least the scenario that we were given, it's almost like this particular client understood the prompt, right? Like knew what to say to answer the questions. And sometimes a lot of clients that I've worked with that self-injure, sometimes when you ask them, in however way you ask why, don't really know, or they give what they think should be a prescribed answer or what they think they should say. And so kind of educating about that, the neural reuse theory, and educating about how it's, I recognize that it's not necessarily really about suicide, and talking about how you're actually very high in emotional detection and generation can really produce an aha moment for the client, and how powerful it can be to, if they're saying if they're giving you kind of short one-word responses, to kind of empower them a little bit to understand what's going on in the brain when I'm doing this, and okay, that actually probably makes sense as to why I am doing this. And now if they're in the pre-contemplative, now I'm actually more open to maybe doing some other things. Like I told my group, I have a client who self-harmed, who doesn't anymore. And in New York, we have long winters. And one method we came up with is she would walk outside on the snow. She would walk to the end of her driveway in the snow and back. And hasn't self-harmed for a long time now because of that. So that psychoeducation piece was huge for that. So that's all I want to say.
I love that. And it really gets at that sort of harm reduction aspect that folks had mentioned in the journal entries. And yes, I think that psychoeducation, first of all, that's so great because it goes really into our next section so well. I also will say, yes, the client does give you sort of maybe more idealized answers, because in this case, the author of this was me. And so, I'm trying to give you we're not going to give you like the most difficult case in the world, but I do think it's important to mention and keep in mind, because it's not always going to be so straightforward. These are very sort of answers to the exact questions that were asked, as opposed to, the one-word answers that young people never give us, never one-word answers. So thank you so much for sharing that. I think it's a great point, or many great points. And your point about psychoeducation. Before we get to that, we have this slide in here that we just wanted to share with you, and we'll share these slides afterwards, just about best practices for engaging caregivers, because we knew that that's sort of a big piece of this, is engaging caregivers. And I think that what's on here is pretty much probably, honestly, review to a lot of folks in here. It's sort of just generally best practices is reaching out in partnership whenever possible. But we just wanted to make sure that we mentioned that as before we sort of go on to our next section. So in our next section, the counselor does reach out with Amanda's consent to Amanda's parents. And in the meeting, she shares with them about Amanda's self-injuring. And both are very surprised to learn about Amanda's behavior. She asks them if they've seen any recent changes in Amanda at home, and they do share that she's become moody and combative over the last, those are their words, over the last year, but attributed these problems to her becoming a teenager, and they didn't suspect any deeper problems. And they have sort of different reactions that her, each of her caregivers. Her mother expresses feeling devastated, scared, like she's failed as a mother. And then this is something I actually overheard in a groups, sort of is that her father says that he feels like he cannot trust Amanda now that he knows she's been hiding this. He's concerned that the parents will have to walk on eggshells around Amanda. Otherwise they'll trigger another episode. And they both feel at a loss for what they should do. So this is our sort of next piece of information, and we're going to give you all another 10 minutes in rooms to talk about sort of what this new information means for your work with Amanda moving forward. So how would you best support Amanda and her parents and respond to the family's concerns? And so I think that this really gets at what you were just bringing up around psychoeducation. Psychoeducation sometimes may be part of this. Maybe you're processing their concerns and their feelings. So thinking about what is important for the family to know, and then how would you respond given this new information? So again, we're going to give you another sort of like between 10 and 15 minutes. I think it's 12:37 now, and I do want to hear from you all before we get back. So it'll probably be closer to like 11 or 12 minutes. And then we'll have you all come back. Questions before we break out again? Okay, great. See you all in a little bit. Come on back. I hope that was enough time. I know that we probably could spend the entire hour on one of these questions if we needed to. So we're trying to give you all a little taste of everything in an hour. So and if you would prefer that, by the way, please put that on your evaluations, which we will be giving you, because we like to get your feedback to see how this is working for folks. Okay. So I would love to hear from folks about this second part of the discussion. If there's folks maybe that we haven't heard from yet, that's not, we can also hear from people we've already heard from, but I would love to hear from anybody maybe that we haven't first.
I'll go. So our group, we talked a lot about just sort of recognizing and validating that the parents are scared, and that their reaction initially was, I did something wrong to cause this, and really sort of having that over identification with it's reflective of me, her being her self-cutting, or Amanda's self-cutting, is a reflection of my bad parenting.
Yeah.
And then talking about just concerns of what sort of safeguards, or what will they do in order to alleviate their fears, right? Will they make her show her arms and legs every day when she comes home from school? Will they, invade her privacy to the point of making things worse? Or at least that's the way I'm thinking, because that's the experiences I've had when I've pulled parents in when, it becomes a punishment.
Yeah.
You brought attention to the family, you brought attention to us. We're being viewed as bad parents.
Yeah.
And I'm going to, I can't outwardly, hurt you,
Right.
but I'm gonna, it's something that I feel is maybe demoralizing or infantilizing, with making her do something that she's uncomfortable doing, or taking away just her privacy.
Yeah. Yeah. Reinforcing that I should not be telling people things.
That there is going to be a repercussion, right?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
I don't know. Sleeping with the door open. I mean, I could think of 1,000 scenarios of what a parent may say when they find out their child is cutting.
Yeah. I'd love to hear, are there other groups that talked about how they've dealt with those kind of situations where parents, are maybe their impulses to come down, and how they've just talked about that maybe, or had any success with thinking through that with parents. Alexa, I see your hand.
I didn't talk about this in my group, but I do have some experience working with students who might have had intent to die, but have stopped themselves when doing a self-harm, or those who are just non-suicidal and self-injuring. And the conversation that we always start with our parents, especially when we're a school clinic, because we're not really an outpatient clinic, is first gauging the way that they feel about the situation. Similar to what Joanna was saying, it's like trying to understand where they're at, and if they're, not really accepting the situation, but how they really perceive it. And then providing some psychoeducation around maybe why the student's doing it, not really disclosing too much information because you don't want to break HIPAA or say something maybe you shouldn't, but explaining the benefits for her and how, or him, and finding out how we can make sure that we're meeting in the middle where the parent feels comfortable, but the student still feels like they're doing the things that they need to do to feel like they're coping.
I love that. I love that. I think that having sort of a way to sort of plan for going into those kind of conversations can be empowering, because a lot of times, I don't know about you all, but like as a provider, I sometimes feel, you take on that anxiety, right? And so having that plan can help to sort of, we're holding, it's, I don't know if you all have seen that. I don't remember what program it is, but there's like that graphic of like the hands holding the parent and the parent's hands holding the child. And it's like sort of we're creating a safe container for the whole family. And the caregivers are also creating that safe container for the young person. And so how do we sort of create that as well? Other folks that would like to share, anybody that wants to, share what came up in their group.
So I don't mind going if that's okay. I don't have a camera. I apologize.
No worries.
Actually,
Thanks,
I didn't
Stephanie.
bring this up in our group, but I'm a short-term program. We go out into the homes, hostile diversion. And so the same thing about really helping the parents understand the psychoeducation around the NSSI versus a suicide attempt. A lot of our kids have both. We also provide the families with lock boxes, but also then say things like, they're out in the world, you're never going to protect them from everything. And then for our purposes, well, I'm not their therapist. And so what I like to do is teach them skills and then bring their parent in and have the kid teach the parent the skill, so that they can help model for them when they're struggling, what to do through, and to understand it's not always going to happen, but it takes practice and it takes parents modeling these things and all of that, and it takes work. We did talk about how you have to use the psychoeducation about why cutting works, and it works fast, and it's going to take time to start a new behavior.
Yes, thank you so much. That's all so valuable. I feel like, and it's hard, right? It's hard to provide that. It's hard to sit with that. It's hard to hear that as a parent when you're in that, you could be completely panicked, right, at that point. And so helping them to sort of, to be with them through that. Great. Anyone else? Maybe we could have time for maybe one more person.
Hi, I can talk.
Yeah.
Hi. I think I was just very curious, and this came up about like any cultural concerns with this family, especially in terms of the shame and the guilt. This is possibly maybe what the parents are thinking. Oh my gosh, not my child. My child couldn't possibly be doing this. So I think it's really important to kind of to consider that, what are their own backgrounds and beliefs in terms of the behavior, in terms of mental health, are they minimizing? Are they saying, no way, can't be my kid? Or they're just so ashamed that they, she's never going out in public again, those kinds of things. So those can have a, huge impact on the child. But I also think, the parents need to be supported as well. And a lot of psychoeducation around, the potential reasons why this could be happening. So.
Yeah. I think that's really important, right? Coming at that with that lens of curiosity. And then also meeting them where they are in terms of their own feelings, right? If, if there's feelings of shame, if there's feelings of judgment, if there's feelings of anger, helping them to sort of come into, let's, like think about what is coming up for you when you hear about this, and what would it be like if people found out about this, and what is your fear around that, and helping to folks to sort of work through that, because it can be really challenging for, regardless of cultural background. But I also do think that cultural background obviously informs the lens with which parents process this and react to it, for sure. And, all of us, right? So, well, we have 4 minutes left, and I want to make sure that we have time to go through our evaluation. I don't want you to have to do that outside of the hour that we are giving you credit for. So I want to make sure, Leslie just put the feedback survey in the chat. And then as you do that, I'm going to bring up the information for our next discussion hour. Hold on one second. Here we go. Okay. Great. So again, if you want to just take the last couple minutes to fill out the evaluation, and the information on the screen is for our next session, which will be on November 7th. I don't really know how it's November already. I'm not really entirely sure how that happened, but again, there will be 2 more offerings. Those are Reimagining Youth Suicide Prevention and Suicide Prevention Among School-Aged Children. And so you'll again be doing 2 journal prompts, 1 for each, and we'll be coming back together to discuss on November 7th. And if there were things that you liked about today that you want to definitely see included in next week's, or sorry, not next week's, on the 7th, please write that. And if you're things that you were like, this did not work at all, don't do this again, please also write that, because we want to make sure that these are helpful for people. So yeah. And once you are finished, you all are welcome to sign off, and we look forward to seeing you next time. And if you have any questions before we sign off, we're going to be here obviously until 1. So, you have a couple minutes. If you want to put any questions or thoughts in the chat, feel free to do that.